Welcome to the Tepper School of Business Multimedia Series. For more information on the Tepper School at Carnegie Mellon, please visit us at www.tepper.cmu.edu/multimedia. And now, here's your selected video.
Well, good afternoon. I hope you enjoyed your first afternoon session, your first class. It's great to have you back in the classroom again, and we're going to go on with our second round of presentations, and we're very happy to have Dr. Jeffrey Williams with us today. Dr. Williams is Professor of Business Strategy here at the Tepper School. How many of you had him when you were here at school? Okay, so maybe I don't need to do any introduction to this group. You came back to ask him more questions on it, but he talks a lot about competitive advantage in changing markets, and he's been doing that for a long time at the Tepper School, which is a credit to his career. He has an ongoing study of strategic factors responsible for success in 70 industries, and that went into his first book, Renewable Advantage, Crafting Strategy Through Economic Time. And you can see his articles often in the Wall Street Journal or Forbes or Fortune. He speaks to our executive audiences as well. He's traveling down to Lockheed Martin these days and other places for executive ed for the school. He's an outstanding teacher. If you were next door in our 152, you would have a chance to see the George Leland Teaching Award for Academic Excellence in the Classroom that's given by our students. And you'd see all the recipients there, and you would see that he's the, other than Dean Damon, he's the only other faculty member at the Tepper School that's ever received it 3 times. So he received it in 1985, 1993, so your class that chose you is actually here at the reunion in great numbers, and in 2012, so as recently as this graduating class. So 2 of our reunion classes are some of your favorite classes. But he received his PhD in finance as well as his MBA, and first his undergraduate degree in electrical engineering, and then his PhD in finance from the University of Michigan. He's worked in engineering and managerial roles with on the Apollo 17 and Space Shuttle program, so he's had some industry background as well, and has published extensively, over 40 studies in strategy, and has worked on the review board for the Strategic Management Journal and the Sloan Management Review and Organizational Strategy. So lots more I could say. You can read it all on the web, but we're very happy to have one of our longtime faculty members who has done an outstanding job of helping our students to be great strategists and to create competitive advantage in their industry. So join me in welcoming Dr. Jeffrey Williams.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. How are you all doing out there? Do you remember that, I think on the last day of class, I promised you that most of you would end up making more money than you know how to spend? For how many of you has that been true? Well, I don't know. Maybe that reflects on the education you had here. I don't know. How many of you remember the paper you wrote for me? Oh, my goodness. Wonderful. So it stayed with you in one form or another. How many of you remember the lobster case? Oh, classic. You understand how to manage lobsters, you can manage just about anything. That was one of the basic principles of the course. Well, I have been here quite a while, and it's been quite a journey that I have shared with a number of you. And I am delighted today to be able to talk to you about something that I care very deeply about. And that is the ability to turn creativity, imagination, into value. Now, if you think about it, everything around us, everything, originated in the mind of someone at some point. And then they brought that product or service to fruition, fended off competitors, provided good service, and we benefit from the result. Economic progress is, in fact, the simple and profound act of turning imagination into value. Now, coming from Tepper, we have a very strong analytic orientation toward everything. almost. And what I have found occasionally is that our expertise in analytics sometimes places the value of creativity and imagination in second place. Look at the current interest in big data, for example. Very important, very important. But where does the original idea come from to create value out of projects like that? So what I'm working on these days, and it is only the kind of work that you would want to do after you have tenure, is thinking more and more about how to systematically turn imagination into value. And what I wanted to do today was to present to you some thoughts on the subject and also get your feedback. There will be a final exam in here today, and I will let you know when that is, and I'm sure you will all pass with flying colors. So let's get started on the journey of what I refer to as mastering your 70% zone, turning imagination into value. If you look at most of the work done in finance and in valuation, on average, about 70% of the value of a typical company is not based on short-term profits or short-term results. It's based on expectations of what the company will deliver in the future. You know this. Do a simple NPV calculation, cash flow calculation. The majority of value comes from stuff that hasn't happened yet. And yet, sometimes it seems like with the pressures of the day-to-day world, competition, global competition, the efficiency of capital markets, increasingly managers are finding it difficult to shift their strategic energy forward to create value in that 70% zone. So that's what I want to talk to you about today. Show you some research that's been done and give you some thoughts on how to actually go about it. The key to advantage and to value creation is not based on where your firm is. It's based on where your firm is headed. Expectations about where it's going to be 3 and 5 years from now. And yet, how much time do we spend on that part of our journey? Well, that's the question that I want you to think about today. If you ask your managers, this might be a nice exercise you might consider, to take out a sheet of paper and on that piece of paper jot down where they think your company will be 3 and 5 years from now. Collect all the papers and look at them. You might be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't, that most of the time as managers go forward in time with their thinking, the vision becomes much more fuzzy, much less clear. And there's certainly a good reason for that. We live in very turbulent times. Someone once asked Andy Grove of Intel, do you have a strategy? Andy Grove said no, and what he meant was he had to be very careful not to get locked into one form of behavior in a changing world. But Intel has a vision of what kind of a company they want to be 5 years from now, the characteristics, the attributes, the sources of advantage. And that's the area that I like to think that imagination and something I'm going to be talking to you about in a minute called disciplined imagination can play a big role. How many of you have experienced what I'm going to refer to as a short-term profit black hole? Here's what happens. Company is concerned about meeting short-term quarterly profits, so managers focus on that more than anything else. They deliver on short-term profits, and now the capital markets expect more short-term profitability. The expectations don't miss analyst forecasts, so that so much of the time becomes devoted toward meeting today's goals, and again, taking energy away from the long term. And part of what we're trying to do with this work is to move managers outside that black hole, that self-reinforcing, it's almost a death spiral if you think about it in terms of renewable advantage, and move them back into forward thinking where forward energy is displaced in ways that yield long-term advantage. The biggest threat to long-term advantage is not competition, it's not technological change, it's entropy. Entropy, of course, is the tendency of stuff to become disorganized and confused over time. And I suspect a number of you, I know I have gone into corporations, and you can almost sense it. They have what I would refer to as an entropic vision. That vision just doesn't have much energy to it. And that's the enemy that we're chasing after today. The other problem with an entropic vision and with short-term orientation is you can end up with undercapitalized value. Now, what that means, of course, is that there are potentially valuable resources, but they aren't being deployed properly for the future. They just sit there almost like an army with no direction to take its future movement. So we want to move companies away from the profit black hole, recapitalize assets, and as a lot of you know from the work that I've done before, the goal here is renewable advantage. So, how do we go about this? How do we operate forward in time? Well, you see, you're thinking about something here. You want something simple and yet comprehensive, maybe some clever words that could summarize it. You know, we've got Porter's 5 forces, you know, that's five boxes. Fantastic. We've got the 4-box grid of the Boston Consulting Group. We have McKinsey's 7S. So I was thinking, what could we create here that would give you that kind of a sensual experience? What I came up with was to focus on time. Time is both the enemy and it's the ally. You know, Alfred Marshall, some 120 years ago, over a century ago, said time, the management of time, was the most central strategic problem there was. And we've come full circle back to that now. The goal of business is not to maximize profits. The goal of business is to exchange today's profits for tomorrow's profits. That's a far more sophisticated and challenging task. What is the best trade-off between making profits today and profits tomorrow so that the entire entity capitalizes value in the best possible way? So I come down on this with the following statement, and we can talk about this either today or any other time you'd like. You've heard of the capital markets being short-term oriented? I don't think they are. I think short-term orientation is actually due to the fault of organizations' inability to create compelling visions for the future. And if there's no compelling vision for the future, the markets simply react to what's left, and that is extrapolation of current profits. So once again, I'm trying to clarify where we're heading with this. What we're going to look at today a little bit is how the 70% zone, in its behavior and its results, yields value, how to best operate in it, how to turn imagination into value, and I'm going to give you some suggestions for moving forward. What the 70% zone is a representation of behavior beyond the current cash flows of where and how future profits will be generated. The 70% zone is that region of your company where you create expectations about the future. Those expectations, as we know, have the potential to drive as much as 70% of the value of your company. How good are we at creating powerful expectations about the future? If you look at one proxy for firms that are good operating in the 70% zone, you can simply look at PE ratios of companies. Companies that have high PE ratios, the expectation is that a lot of the value will come in the future. It's not yet in earnings, but it's driven by expectations that commitments made today will yield high value tomorrow. Now, sometimes these PE multiples are influenced by industry structure, fast-growing industries versus slow-growing industries. So we do have to be careful to modify a little bit general statements like this. So what are the challenges to mastering your 70% zone? I'm going to suggest that there are 4. And these are the 4 that we're going to focus on today. Creating a compelling vision, translating imagination into business logic, creating commitment on the part of the organization, and then your ability to inspire and stretch people toward the new vision. What are the benefits to doing this? Higher capitalization, increased competitiveness, escape from what could be thought of as commodity-like behavior, where we're always chasing after the lowest price product, less short-term behavior, more overall energy. This kind of stuff tends to energize organizations. And I also believe it is important to overall economic growth. So what does the research say about turning imagination into value? Well, a lot of books have been written on parts of the problem. There has been a lot of research done that has been published in papers, and there have been a lot of discussions with executives. And what the research suggests, at least to me, is that it is possible to systematically turn imagination into value. I'm going to tell you how I think that can be done. Now, some people are already pretty good at it. Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, Warren Buffett, they appear to have the ability to imagine the future with discipline in ways that tend to outperform their competitors. So we know some companies are good at it. And these are companies that of course, can provide studies for best practices. The notion of growing into the future is not surprisingly all that well correlated with high R&D. You might think, well, firms have high R&D. These are the ones that are really most innovative. A recent study was done in strategy and business that actually asked a whole bunch of folks to rank most innovative companies, and that's the blue here, most innovative in ranking, and then asked them to, or actually showed them what their R&D levels were. And in a lot of cases, the most innovative companies were not the ones that spent the most on R&D. Something else is going on. That's what I think is something that we need to study today. So going back to the idea of 4s and 7s and 3s, let's see, what could we come up with? Well, 4 is a good number, so we got to think of 4 things. One of them's got to be creativity, so we got to think of 3 other things that start with C. We came up with, not that, that's the wrong button. We came up with 4 steps: creativity, conversion, commitment, and convincing. First step is a process of creativity. We looked a little bit at that. The second step, conversion, is translating the imagination into business logic. The third step is gaining commitment to forward investment behavior. It's absolutely critical. And then the fourth step is really convincing your organization and the capital markets that you're not crazy and that what you're doing actually makes sense. So let's see if we can look at, in a little bit more detail, each of these steps. Creativity, where does it come from? Well, if you look around at people that seemingly know a lot about creativity, they tend to say some interesting things that are somewhat similar. As you probably know, one of my heroes is Joseph Schumpeter, who saw competition as the chase after the innovator. His perspective on innovation is that it is a combination of what has come before, rather than some kind of an original idea. Now, keep that in mind. I'm going to show you a couple more definitions. Second, study published in a book called Intelligent Memory. Intelligent memory is like connecting the dots to form a picture. Once again, the ability to draw connections between images that you already have in your mind. Number 3, one of our favorite innovators, Steve Jobs, just comes out and says it. Creativity is just connecting things, just making associative steps between things that other people don't make. And then finally, another book called Strategic Intuition concludes that it's a combination of previous elements. So in a lot of ways, this thing called creativity, when you break it down into its behavior, has a lot to do with a very simple act of how well you can connect experiences and images that you already have. And I've got some good news for you. You're smarter than you think. Well, some of you think you're pretty smart, so I don't know what that means. But IQ measures 2 kinds of intelligence, linguistic and logical mathematical. That's what you get tested on when you do an IQ test. Folks who have studied intelligence have come up with many other forms of intelligence, including linguistic, spatial, body kinesthetic. Say that 5 times very early in the morning. Body kinesthetic. Interpersonal and introductory personal. And then they've also added naturalistic and existential types of intelligence. All of those forms of intelligence are part of the process of creating new ideas. So those of you who may not have scored as high as you wanted to in the IQ test, it's only because you have the other 7 forms of creativity that is actually needed. You're a lot smarter than you think. So let's imagine that you've put a bunch of folks in a room, talked about what's possible for your organization, and you've got a lot of bits and pieces out there, a lot of stuff kind of flying around, some ideas. Now what? What do you do? Well, now we get into the process of applying good management science and economic principles to imagination. We're going to call that process conversion, where we convert from imagination to business logic. How do we move from creativity to business logic? The notion of disciplined imagination, which is a term that was coined by a fellow named Carl Weicht at the University of Michigan a long time ago, but has been taken up and moved forward by a lot of different people. It's the combination of imagination, but also the discipline from business logic. Where does this come from? I think my best interpretation of disciplined imagination is the ability of either a group or an individual to combine the processes of both right brain and left brain thinking. Right brain is holistic, left brain is sequential, left brain is logical, right brain is spatial. You need both to translate imagination into business logic. Now, when you put your working group together, you want to make sure you've got people in there that can talk across that boundary of left and right brain, because sometimes logic tends to discount imagination, which is a real problem, and sometimes imagination can't be turned into business logic without a lot of really good experience. Another way of saying somewhat the same thing is you need both generalists and specialists in the process. So as you populate your group, and as Anita was speaking just before I was here, we know that group size is anywhere from 8 to 10. You get 11 people, you get stupid all of a sudden, apparently, and we don't want that. 8 to 10 people populated by generalists and specialists. Now, occasionally, you may know who they are, individual people have the ability to do this. They themselves are both generalists and specialists. And if you've got some time in your company, try to identify those folks. It's a terrific skill to have. The ability to imagine, but then also translate that into business logic. The second thing you might do, the first formal thing you might do, is use something called an activity map. It's a very nice way to organize the bits and pieces of a new idea. And what the activity map does is it starts with a statement of what your competitive differentiator is in your company, and then tries to identify all of the components that goes into creating that competitive differentiation. Now, at this point, there's no business model, but there is a structural relationship, and that's the first step. Between imagination and business logic, you need an architecture. I can show you an activity map from Southwest that may be familiar because a lot of you fly Southwest. Basically, limited passenger service, frequent departures, productive ground crews, high aircraft utilization, low ticket prices, and flying on secondary routes. Those were the big chunks of the imagination of Herb Kellner before he actually built his business model. And the next slide is far too busy, but I thought I'd throw it in anyway. It's a Southwest activity map when you fill it in with a number of other enabling activities. But if you can build this kind of a map for your vision, you've taken a huge first step in making that conversion process successful. Now, being who we are at Tepper, very analytic, we need our business models. So let's build a business model. There is no final exam on this, but here we are. Basically, for my purposes and the work I've done, I think that the best representation of a business model is one that starts with the value proposition, lists the key assets, key routines, and the profit formula. And I'll post this on my website, the talk, and there'll be a minor charge for downloading it, John, which I'll turn over to administration.
Well, thank you very much.
Since I'm so used to turning things over to administration, I will turn it over to administration. But there you are on that. Now, once you've got your business model built, you need to test it. What are some of the key tests to a good business model? Profitability. Does it target a sufficiently unfulfilled profit pool? Second, do we have the critical success drivers needed, or can we get them? Sustainability. Are the best practices configured to the cycle times and the speed of the market so that we're recovering cash flows in the most efficient way over time? And then finally, actionability. Do we have both the culture and the ability to move toward our goal? So you might, again, you can see now we're moving from imagination to a little bit more management science or structure. Then we get to commitment. How do you direct resources forward in a short-term world? Well, commitment is a little bit like provisioning. Imagine stagecoaches moving out west in the 1800s. They had to exhibit a certain amount of discipline as to the speed at which they consumed and acquired resources. And again, as I said before, this returns to an earlier point, you need to think about exchanging current profitability for future profitability, knowing that you're part of a long journey. Now, having said that in a general way, let's see if we can be a little bit more specific. But first, we've got to recognize that short-term behavior is, in fact, widespread. And no talk on creating value through imagination would be complete without at least confirming what a lot of you know. A study was done, some 400 financial executives, more than half actually stated that they would delay these forward investments to meet earnings reports, even if it harmed the competitiveness of the company. So when you sense short-term behavior, it's very real. It threatens the vitality of companies, and it is, in fact, the enemy that we're trying to combat with this kind of an approach today. Now, a fellow named Alfred Rappaport, who some of you may know, he was at Northwestern. He's now retired in La Jolla, La Jolla being a rather nice part of the country. He told me that he plans to never get on an airplane again as long as he lives, because he's already at the place that everybody wants to go to. But a fellow named Alfred Rappaport has written a number of books on creating shareholder value. And he actually recommends a couple of techniques you can use to begin to mitigate short-term behavior and create long-term incentives to allow this imagination conversion I'm talking about. These include indexed option plans based on a company's competitors. Don't reward managers for how well they do. Reward them for how well they do relative to competition. That's the thought. And then you, again, restrict sale of shares for a longer period of time after managers leave. And then at the managerial level, the recommendation is to move away from profit accounting and to cash flow accounting, which according to Professor Rappaport would tend to move your horizon forward a little bit more. So there are some techniques you can use to create the environment and the culture for the kind of commitment we need. But we need more than just the environment and the culture. One technique that I found very useful when you're trying to get an organization to commit to the future is something called a staircase strategy. Now, a staircase strategy basically maps over time the various stages of commitment that an organization is going to make. And you very carefully map out the staged commitments over time, first quarter, second, third, fourth, and you do it in a logical way that tracks the behavior that has come before. And what this can do is it can, when you're faced with a challenge of investing in a new project based on your imagination, there's a tendency for people to think, oh my God, this is a huge amount of money, it's a massive amount of risk. Well, if you stage your commitments, what you can do is you can take various steps, think of them like experiments over time. And each step has to be validated with feedback from the market on how well you're doing. So it can mitigate risk and also help ensure forward behavior. Now, when you look at companies that have been very successful, you can place a lot of their strategies in a staircase kind of setting. Amazon, which a lot of you know, was able to run completely without profits or something like, what was it, 5 or 6 years? They didn't make a penny. They lost a lot of money. And the capital markets loved Jeff Bezos' imagination, disciplined imagination so much, they left him alone. Well, during this process, and as part of the process, he was building that staircase, a set of staged commitments that tracked a vision that he had. Google has also done the same thing. Google has systematically built and enlarged their platformers' behavior in a very staged, sequential kind of way over time. So these are examples of strategy staircasing that can be used to translate disciplined imagination into actual investments. There's one final one on staircasing I wanted to share with you because I had some personal experience in this. Apple, of course, as you can imagine, has also had this kind of a staircase. They started with the Macintosh, which was really no big deal. Well, actually it was, but nobody thought it was a big deal. If we plot value on this axis and how value increases over time, we've got this company running about $8 a share. The Mac comes along. Then they come out with the iPod, and the stock is selling at about $40 a share. That's the point in time that I bought it. Okay? Then they come out with iTunes to lock in customers. Stock goes to about $80 a share. That's when I sold it. Yeah, what can I say? I said they'd never come out with anything better than that. Well, so there. All right, then they come out, of course, with the iPhone. And the stock is now pushing about $200 a share. And then they come out with the App Store, which ties the iPhone together just the way iTunes and iPod were tied together. Then they come out with the iPad, which also ties into the App Store. And then they tie everything together with the iCloud, which basically locks everything in backwards on the staircase. It was a very, if you look at it back in time, either they were extremely lucky or they had a lot of disciplined imagination in a process like this. Now, of course, the value has gone down a little bit since it was at its high, but it's still, according to yesterday, it's now the second most valuable company. The most valuable company is now Exxon, yeah, the oil people. Well. But Apple's staircase strategy can be seen as another manifestation of disciplined imagination. For those of you who may remember some of the work we did in class, the 70% zone differs by the cycle speed of the business. You've got fast, standard, and long cycle investment horizons. Each of them have different characteristics, and that needs to be factored into commitment over time. I also want to just, before we leave commitment, to just say a word about mistakes that are made, or what can be thought of as a smart mistake, and the value of smart mistakes in achieving commitment and learning about an organization's new ability to create. Think of smart mistakes as experiments. How does a smart mistake differ from a regular investment? Most regular investments are done by managers with the goal of winning, of succeeding. A smart mistake occurs because managers want to learn something about the marketplace. And it denotes a different kind of commitment and a different kind of investment profile, and it also has built-in exit points. So you might want to add that to your toolkit if you're thinking about ways to mitigate concerns about long-term commitment. There's also another technique that you can use called stretch mapping. You see how analytic this is getting, John? We had to do it. We just had to. Well, as you're imagining what's possible, do an audit of your organization. In fact, let's say you've got that 10 or maybe 15 people in a room. Ask them, how much of a change in organization structure will the new initiative require? Let's say people kind of agree on that. How much of a change in incentives will it require? Let's say that 1/3 of the people list minimal, 1/3 list moderate, and 1/3 of the people say most. What does that denote to you as somebody who's trying to get this project to go forward? These people don't have a clue on how to do this because they have very different perceptions on what will be involved. So stretch mapping can help you achieve organizational coherence, which is very important in the process of turning ideas into value. One more thought. This is a little break in our talk here, a little history thing. Here's a quote that says something about commitment. If you knew how much work went into this, you wouldn't call it genius. Do you have any idea who said that? That's a good guess, although he did get a lot of people to work for him, but you're absolutely right. That's a good guess. It's not quite right. Turns out it was Michelangelo. And what was the project? You want to guess? That's right, Sistine Chapel. Took him 4 years. Talk about commitment. So we do need to remind ourselves that what I'm doing by sitting up here is talking about things, not making them happen. And commitment is actually a lot of hard work to dig in and actually achieve results. Now, you've got this business model. You've created it. How do we persuade people that it's a good idea? If we build it, will they come? No, they won't. I mean, how many really great ideas have failed because they failed the convincing test? Lots. Yes, but. How do you overcome the folks who will always find something wrong with a new idea? What's the approach that you think would be best suited to overcome objections for any kind of a new project? All new projects will generate objections. The best way?
Well, according to the picture, fire.
Well, we could do that. So was that in one of your courses here when you were in here? Did you? Was that an OB extracurricular activity for you? What I have found, and I want to begin to kind of close this discussion by emphasizing this, really successful people in this process are really good at telling stories. Managers and the capital markets love good stories. If you can tell a good story, like Jeff Bezos has done, you have enabled the first 3 parts of the process very successfully. Now, part of telling that story could be to develop a 2-page battle plan. Now, where did that idea come from? This gentleman here with a cigar looking very British. Yes, he does look that way. He asked his generals on the day that, about a week before the Allies were to invade Normandy, he asked his generals to summarize the entire invasion on 2 pages. And he said that if they couldn't do it, he was afraid he wouldn't understand it. But more importantly, if they couldn't do it, you know where I'm heading, he was afraid they wouldn't understand it. Now what I found, and I think a lot of you have too when you really think about it, can you get this great new idea summarized in 2 pages? And I'll give you the template. First thing you need is an elevator pitch. Who's that elevator pitch for? Investors and employees, you bet. 15 seconds. What's it about? Why should I care? Then, of course, you get into the various mission and strategy elements. And I found this to be very, very useful in the battle plan. What do you want from corporate? In what way do you want corporate to support the process? Second page. Well, we've got tracking metrics, of course, capabilities under development, but what are the key unresolved issues behind that plan? Those can become action items for investigating and moving forward. What is the most critical thing that has to happen in order for this activity to be successful? Can you get your 8 to 10 people, we'll ask the 11th person to leave at this point, to develop a 2-page battle plan? This is what I'm about to show you next, violates all good principles of PowerPoint. It's far too busy. Except it is an example which will be available if you want to download the talk. On a client that I worked with, this has been disguised. Elevator pitch, vision, mission, what they want from corporate. Critical success factors, what is most critical to the activity. If you can put it on 2 pages and tell a good story, you will, I think a lot of you know this, but it bears emphasizing, your credibility will take a huge jump in front of your audience. Because you'll appear, at least, to know what you're doing, and that's the first step in any kind of a process. Second or third thing that I would advocate is passion. Now, we have to be careful with that one a little bit, don't we? But I'm talking about the passion that comes from the human spirit. In this day and age of analytics, which we believe in deeply here at Tepper, there is still room for passion. Do you really care a lot about what you're doing? This is, by the way, a statement of strategy from a company called Dogfish Head Beer, and it shows, I think, a lot about passion. Can you embody the human spirit, your human spirit, the spirit of your organization, so that this is a passionate activity, not just rote reporting? How would you say, what's in it for me? Why should I do it? I'll let you think about that a minute. How do you know if you're succeeding? Here's some ways you'll know. You'll find it easier to gain commitment in your organization to those tough choices. The organization there'll be a certain energy level that goes up. People will just, their eyes will start lighting up again. Not all of them, but a lot of them. It's going to be a lot easier to identify future leaders because these kind of people are really drawn to a vision. one of the most important things that really capable people look for when they go to work for a company, it's not how much they're getting paid. What is the vision? What is the imagination? What is the disciplined imagination that that company is embodying in what it does? And again, investors will be more patient. Swings in short-term profitability will have less effect on stock price because of the long-term momentum on cash flows. Oh, you're also going to have more fun. A lot more fun. A lot more fun. So let me kind of begin to close with a call to action for those of you who... An academic presentation, should it have a call to action, John? An academic research that is scholarly and above action? Well, anyway. All right, here's a call to action. I have 6 to 8. Well, I'll have to do a little bit of work on that one. Ask these folks, what would be possible for your organization in 3 to 5 years? What would be a really cool desired future state? Add logic from economics. Basically, you're going through these steps. Map out this kind of staging behavior that would be required, and then craft and spread your great story. It may not be that difficult. I think there are ways to systematically turn imagination into value. As I say, that's the goal of this work. So let me recap what we've been talking about for the last 45 minutes. I believe that renewal is the most important activity that leaders can engage in for any organization. The 70% zone requires continually turning imagination into value through the 4 steps that we've talked about here, the 4 C's of the process. Sufficiently robust or not, your organization does have a 70% zone. Question is, how well are you mastering it? Is there an opportunity to breathe more life into those assets and those people? Well, thinking about the capability of this room, which is extraordinary, and the education you've had and all your experience, I can imagine that when you leave here, you will do a pretty good job. So I'm going to give you all an A+. And I wish you all the very best. And I thank you for your attention. Any thoughts or questions? There don't have to be any. Yes, sir.
Downloading the presentation, where can you...
Well, I will put it on my website. JRW@CMU. That's not how you reach me. How do they reach me on the website?
They go to the faculty page.
Faculty page. We have faculty page.
And your website is off the faculty page.
And I will, it'll take me a couple of days, but I promise I will put that on there for you, should you wish it. Okay. You know what I tell my students increasingly is that what I hope they get out of my courses and the work we do here in strategy, it's of course very important to learn how to be a good strategist, but I hope more than anything that with the tools and techniques that we taught you and that we're continuing to reinvent, that it will increase your ability to work at a company you really enjoy in ways that you enjoy. I will close with this very uplifting thought, which is that with current improvements in healthcare, a number of you are going to live to be 120. That means you'll be working until you're 90. And for some of you, that's 60 more years, or it's a long time. You more than ever, me, myself, in order to keep the lights on between the eyes, are going to have to continually renew yourself. You're going to have to operate in that 70% zone where you turn imagination into the right kind of choices to regenerate your human spirit. And hopefully this helps a little bit with that too. So, thanks. Thanks.
you, Dr. Williams. We are going to move from our presentation today out to the Tepper tea. So if you'd like something to drink and you just want to relax a little bit and visit before we all rush off to our celebration tonight at the Phipps Conservatory, we're going to go down the stairs again, take a left into the Posner Center, that very nice conference area that we were in this morning for the Dean's presentation. And the drinks will be out in the lobby of that building, and some of the faculty will be there to visit with you. So come join us for this Tepper afternoon tea. Thank you.